I was a very naive and egotistical young man, and I had a chip on my shoulder because I had a very successful father who was very successful in business. And my motivation was purely, if my dad can succeed in business, then I can succeed too. And I don't believe in being data driven. I believe in being data informed. At Almosafer, for the first, I would say, 2 years or so, I will admit that I didn't even have a product strategy. There is no concept of I did my part. We are a collective. We either collectively succeed or we collectively fail.
Hey everyone, welcome to the show. Today I have a very interesting guest. Ronnie is here with us. Ronnie was the former Chief Digital Officer at Almosafer, and I've been doing a lot of research on him, and very interestingly, I see him as one of the interesting folks out there to talk about digital transformation. How do you build product teams? How do you look at product problems? And part of the show for me, part of the reason why I started this show was to bring on people like Ronnie, people in product, people in growth, people in sales, people in marketing, more from GCC and MENA backgrounds, and make it a very open podcast where I can ask them deep questions on their career, on the challenges they faced, the challenges they faced in building product. How do they look at growth? How do they look at problems in the GCC? And I'm very excited to have him here. And I think to start off with, Ronnie, welcome to the show. I want to make this a bit of a deeper podcast. I've read a lot about you. The part where I couldn't find a lot of info was maybe your early childhood and what sort of things shaped you to become a product leader. So maybe we could just start off with that and take it from there.
I guess, Tausif, I'll just start by saying thank you so much for having me on your show. It's a privilege to always come and to share experiences and learnings with, with the community in general, right? This is something that I absolutely love to do. And I really appreciate you asking me to come on. So it's a real privilege to be here. What's his early childhood? Well, I think part of the reason why maybe you weren't able to find anything about my early childhood, I guess it kind of dates me, is that I'm pre sort of social media, pre-internet.
Got it.
I guess. It's like, I guess, like I still recall moving. And so a little bit about, I'm a very multicultural kid. I'm originally from the south of India, a place called Kerala. That's where my ancestry is. But I was born and raised in Saudi Arabia in a place called Al Khobar. So I grew up there till I was about 13 years old. And then when I was 13, my family migrated to Toronto, Canada. And then I did my high school there, my undergraduate degree there, worked there for a number of years. And so my early life was spent being from one community, but growing up in a completely different country with a completely different culture, and then having to move to a third place with even a completely different culture. So I think a lot of what defines me as a person is this openness to everything and everybody. I'm very grateful for that upbringing because, when you're exposed to so many different things, you become very curious. You become very naturally curious about people, about beliefs, about culture, about religion, about how people think, how people act, why people do what they do. I didn't really realize that was a lot of what was getting imprinted on me. Another aspect of that I think came out of it is that I turned into kind of a chameleon growing up. I'll tell you a funny story. I remember I grew up in an Indian school, like an Indian sort of system school. And when I was probably in the 6th grade, my parents decided to switch me to an American school because we were going to migrate to North America probably in a couple of years. So they decided that, hey, let's give them a chance to integrate better. And I still remember the first day I went to that American school and kids started talking to me, this accent came out. And I have no idea where it came from, other than it just came out of me. And maybe it was from watching all of the American shows growing up. And there was that deep part of me that didn't want to get made fun of, wanted to fit in, whatever it is. And that was sort of the beginning of this, like, oh my God, I can really become something if I need to be. Now, of course, that's something that we'll talk about a little bit later. I had to really look at whether that's a healthy, constructive thing or not. But I guess that's something, about my childhood. It's like, because I grew up traveling all around, I got this real exposure to just everything and everybody that gave me a certain kind of open-mindedness and a curiosity that I'm really, really grateful for.
I think one of the reasons why I wanted to ask you this question in the first place was I came across this analogy about gaming, and I think that was beautiful. Maybe so. I guess gaming was a big part of your childhood, and that also shaped in some way or the other how you thought about product, right?
Absolutely. I mean, so I had from very, very early age, I had an interest in computers, programming, and gaming, and also building hardware as well. Like, again, I'm going to date myself. My first computer was a Commodore 64, where like literally floppy disks were not like the small floppy disks, but they were the big floppy disks. And you literally had to load up a hard boot the operating system before you could put in another disk and play a game. And then after that, it was kind of finding all the really, really old school games in systems like that. And then there was a lot of like building computers, which I absolutely loved as well. And then, follow on to much, much later. I mean, the gaming context, I think the article you probably read was the reference I was making to product teams and how I see, and it doesn't need to be a product team, any team for that matter, with multifunctional capabilities. But in the context of me having a product background and building product teams, I always used to see a group of people within a product team kind of like a RPG squad, like in a role-playing game. They're going on an adventure, like they have some quest, right? They have this quest of either slaying a dragon, conquering something, or maybe it's discovering something. And you have all these different characters with all these different skills, and you cannot progress in the game unless each of these skills is brought into solving whatever the puzzle is in the game, right? And how they have to collaborate together. And so it's this concept of they have one common objective, but they're all going to try and solve that common objective together, and they can't do it without each other.
Do you still game?
I would say today my gaming is a little bit different. I have a 9-year-old son. And so today, the depth of my gaming is I play video games with him when he's playing, but not to the degree that I used to game back in the day when I was single or wasn't a dad yet. So on occasion, still do.
Super. So talk to me about what did you study and what was like your first job, and then obviously let's go into the first two startups also that you launched. How did you launch them? Why did you launch them? And what were sort of the key challenges you faced?
So, I had a very typical, I would say, Indian kid upbringing. Like the plan was always to get a higher education, either become a doctor, a lawyer, or my dad was a businessman, business person. So there was always this concept of, okay, going into business. So for me, again, like I told you, I had this fascination for computers. So I went to school and did my computer engineering degree. Absolutely loved it. Nearly failed out of my first year and a half of school because it was really, really hard. Then I learned to study again and got through it. And when I graduated from school, I graduated from school during the dot-com bust, just when the bubble had burst. It was in 2003, so it was a couple of years after the 2000 dot-com bubble burst. And I went into the job market when, there were no jobs. And I had seniors that, had been in these great jobs who were getting laid off and now looking for work. And here I was like this new graduate, just how am I going to compete? I got really lucky. I was in Toronto, Canada at the time, and I went to a job fair and I ended up getting hired by this really up and coming startup. It was a B2B, what's referred to as an HCM platform, a human capital management platform. And I actually started my career as a quality assurance analyst. So I was testing software. And surprisingly, I fell absolutely in love with it. Like I loved testing software because, it was this perfect, I would say, merge between understanding what the customer or the user needs, like what job they're trying to accomplish. And because I was a pretty good engineer, I would love testing the software and finding wherever the problems were and not just writing a ticket and handing it over to an engineer, but I would actually go into the code and figure out where the problem was. And I would go give both, the original spec to the engineer, but I'll also point out, hey, this is where you need to fix it in the code. So, the engineers both loved and hated me. And that was really my first introduction to product management without knowing that I was doing product management. And I did that as a quality assurance engineer. And then, so I did that for about 3 months. And then I quickly transitioned into actually being an implementation consultant. And so they quickly transitioned me in front of clients and working with customers. And that again exposed me a lot into, hey, let me understand what your real problem is and how can I help you solve it using the technology that the company that I work for, has built. So once again, I was doing a lot of product work without really knowing that I was doing product work. I carried on the typical Indian kid path, which is I went back to school to do my MBA because, apparently that's what I had to do without, again, any idea why I was doing it other than it was the thing to do. I was very naive. Trust me, like looking back, I realized just how naive I was in so many things. But I did go back to school, did my MBA, and I actually really enjoyed it. Like I learned the breadth of learning. Like it's one of
Mm-hmm.
those programs where I didn't go into depth in anything, but you learn the full spectrum of business, right? And things like accounting, strategy, marketing, finance, all of the key areas that touch upon big business. Graduated from that, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't want to go down the finance route because banking wasn't really my thing. The alternative that existed was going into management consulting. And I'd never even heard of management consulting before I did my MBA. I often joke about that whenever I do talks and stuff. It's like, yeah, I'm a recovering management consultant. I went, again, all the bells and whistles. They sell you this great, high prestige job that everyone wants. And I didn't even know if it's what I wanted to do. I applied for the job, went through the interviews, and I ended up getting the job. And I did it for a couple of years, and I both loved and hated it. What I loved about it is I loved the fact that you're working on some pretty large scale problems, and there was a deep level of analytics attached to it. Like it was the first time I was getting into sort of business numbers and understanding the P&L of a business. So theoretically, I was doing great advisory work, but the thing that I hated about it is obviously one, the lifestyle was just god awful, right? Like, I mean, like working 90, 100-hour weeks and not having any life whatsoever and realizing that, oh my God, in the next 20 years, I can make partner, but I will literally just not enjoy myself. I made this quick decision within about 2 years where I'm like, no, I don't think this is what I want to do. And I want to go back into building things. I didn't actually immediately go back into the startup world. I transitioned from sort of like big consulting into niche consulting for a more technology focused consulting firm. So I got to do a bit more of the hybrid, right? Like I went back into doing advisory work for clients, but being able to design and build and deploy solutions for them as well. And after about 2 years of doing that, I identified a problem within the space I was in that is what
Mm-hmm.
inspired me to go and try building my first startup. So like what's interesting about that though is that like you asked the question of like what led me to go do the startup. I'd love to sit here and tell you that, oh, I found this really interesting problem, or I had this like entrepreneur's itch. But in all reality, again, I was a very naive and egotistical young man, and I had a chip on my shoulder because I had a very successful father who was very successful in business. And my motivation was purely, if my dad can succeed in business, then I can succeed too. And I think all of my life before that point, doing well in school, doing well in my career, I think some part of that was always driven with this need to prove to my dad that I can be successful. Really neat problem to solve, but I primarily did it because I wanted to see if I could be a successful entrepreneur. Like it was a deeply self-centered, deeply selfish motivation. I didn't know it at the time, right? Like I really did because I had zero self-awareness at that stage of my life. And I was able to convince three of my best friends to quit their jobs and come and do this thing with me. And I raised about $500,000 in seed funding to go and build the solution. And the problem we were solving was essentially real-time project management for
Okay.
large-scale system integrators. So imagine I worked for system integrators or large consulting companies that essentially implement large software for huge clients, ERP systems, human capital systems, HR systems, all of these different types of things. And the implementation of these types of systems are quite complex. And you'll have teams of 300 people, 20 plus teams. And imagine the problem is that on a weekly basis, you're trying to project manage all of this. And project managers are spending the entire week getting status updates from people on, hey, how are things progressing? And there's sort of a weekly meeting where they go look at the status of these things and the information is already stale.
Got it.
And so people are spending more of their time chasing things down and collecting information than actually focusing on making decisions. So, me and my co-founders, we actually sat down and spent 6 months building this product. And so I'll tell you some of the problems with that and then some of the learnings with that. One, like I told you, I had a massive ego. So I thought I'd figured out the solution to this great grand problem that, that that was going to change the world. I think in week one, so we'd all quit our jobs and started the startup. And that was the moment that I decided to start doing some research on, has anyone done this before? And that's the moment where me and my co-founders, I remember they were my best friends too. So the four of us were sitting in our office and I was doing this research. I was like, guys, there's like about 10 other solutions doing exactly this in this space right now. And oh my God, it was such like I don't know, like the deflation moment, right? Where we were like, God, guys, what have we done? Of course, again, I was so naive That I was like, it's okay, guys, don't worry about it. It doesn't matter if other people have done this. Our idea is pretty brilliant. We know who we're targeting. It's a pretty niche space. And so for 6 months, we built this solution. And never once in those 6 months did I speak to a customer or try to pitch this to anybody. I believed in my head that no, we know what it is. So I was both the product manager, but I was also the customer. And then 6 months into building this solution, it was at that point that I actually started getting out and started trying to sell it to potential customers. And the response was hilarious. And the fascinating response that I got was project teams that the solution was meant to enable and empower and make them
Mm-hmm.
faster and more efficient in what they did. They loved it, right? They absolutely loved it. They were like, oh my God, this actually does help us solve our problems. But it's actually the leaders, the directors, the VPs, the budget holders who are the real customer. They said, look, this is a really, really interesting product, but my question is, you'll make my teams more efficient, right? And I said, yeah, that's the entire purpose of this. And he said, look, you don't understand something. We work on billable hours. And, I'm here to bill my clients. And if you're saying that you'll make my teams more efficient, that means less billable hours for me, right? It's
Yeah.
like, here you go. It's like, there's the insight right there. You can see, it's like literally the responses I got is, wait, you're going to cost me money because I'm going to lose revenue from my customers? And I said, yeah, but you can go find more clients and it'll make you better. Your customers will love you. No, 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 no. That's not how we work. Right? It was a mind bending moment for me where I was just like, are you kidding me? Are you serious? Like, you don't want to solve this problem in this way? And this was the moment where I realized that, oh my God, a couple of things I learned. One, sitting 6 months in a room building a phenomenal piece of software thinking I had it was absolutely the wrong thing to do. I should have been talking to customers from day one before we had written a single line of code, right? The second thing I learned was that, there for a lot of products, your user and your buyer are completely different people.
I think there's as a very interesting point, right? So for me, the main key point was talk to as many customers as much as you can. Uh, and I see that's very rarely done. The different types of businesses that I work with, it's the least in terms of the priority list. How often do you think we should be talking to customers? How do you go about thinking about this whole process of talking to customers, prioritizing what sort of feedback should you be getting from customers? A few insights on that.
I think it really depends on the type of organization, the stage at which you're at, the type of function that you're doing as well. So in that particular example, when it was Veritasq was the startup, we were a startup. At that stage, we should have been out talking to any and all people that possibly fit our segment constantly on a daily basis. Because
Hmm.
as a startup, you've got very little money and your job is to find a problem that is worth solving that is also possibly a scalable problem. So it should be a daily process of getting out there and talking. In fact, other than maybe your engineers that are spending time building product, the early founders of your business should be constantly spending their time talking to potential customers. But one of the common mistakes that I think a lot of startup founders make also is they think about their product, but they don't think about their go-to-market strategy. And oftentimes there's, startup products fail, I see, for one of two reasons. One is that they don't find product market fit because they just haven't solved a meaningful enough problem. But a second one is oftentimes I'll see startups that have built a great product, but they didn't figure out what is their go-to-market strategy. Like how do you get your segment of customers to know who you are and know that you've solved this problem for them and make it really easy for them to access you, right? Fast forward a little bit to a scaling startup like Almosafer. There we were doing customer research in a much more formalized way. And that format, and there's a couple of resources I always recommend to people, right? Like one is, I mean, obviously talk to customer researchers because customer researchers are researchers in general are phenomenal at their craft. And there's many different modes of connecting with customers that are relevant to the type of information you're trying to get from your customer.
Hmm.
But I always think about it from the framing of, two modes. There's problem discovery and there's solution discovery. Problem discovery is, hey, is this a problem worth solving? And there's very particular modes in which you can do research with customers to answer those questions. A lot of it is around doing things like prototype testing, right? Or customer interviews or customer surveys if you want to go much broader and get more surface level answers. But you do have to get down and interview customers at a deeper level if you want to really, really get to the depth of what problem are you solving for them, what job are they trying to get done, and how can you do it for them well. Then there's the second side, which is again solution discovery, which again comes back to a lot of prototype testing, even something simple as putting paper prototypes, right, or digital prototypes in front of customers just to test with them. Does this actually solve your problem for you, right? And so when we started Almosafer, we started with not doing a lot of customer research at all. Eventually, we moved to a place where no, we need to be talking to our customers. Like it started as quarterly research cycles.
Mm-hmm.
By the time our third year rolled around, the expectation was all of our teams should be doing weekly customer interviews, testing something, right? Like whether it's problem statement validation, right? If they're doing more generation of what's coming up for the next quarter, all the way to, okay, are we testing a solution with our customer?
Perfect. You got the paycheck for Veritasq. You exited it. What happened next? What was the thought process at that time? What were you thinking about doing?
I got introduced to another person who was a little bit older than me, a little bit more experienced than me. He was a CTO at another startup in Toronto and a lot more experienced than me. And I remember just getting introduced to him and having a conversation with him. Turns out he actually came from the original company that I worked at. The first company I worked at called WorkBrain right after I graduated
Okay.
from my undergrad. He was an
Huh?
engineer there as well. He grew on to become an engineering manager and then later on a startup founder himself. I
Uh-huh.
got introduced to him and this guy just blew me away, right? He just instantly became my mentor, became a really good friend.
Mm-hmm.
He just really, really headed off. And I was just very honest with him about all of our mistakes from the first startup. And then he told us, he's like, you know what? You guys are a really smart group of guys. Would you be interested in doing something with me? So the second startup didn't come from any clear product idea,
Mm-hmm.
didn't come from any clear, problem. It was just a group of us that really liked each other's company, respected each other, and we were like, we like spending time with each other, and we respect each other's intelligence. We think that we've got something that we can give. Can we do something together? And that's where it started. And that's where our second startup called Polyform Labs came about. So, through our network, we actually my mentor, he managed to get us one client, which was one of the largest real estate investment trusts in Canada, and they wanted us to come in to essentially do system integration work for them. They wanted us to replace their existing ERP system. And something quite interesting happened where we evaluated what they were trying to do, and we were working with the CEO and their director of IT, and we said, you know what? Yes, we can replace your ERP for you, but we don't think that's going to solve whatever problems you're struggling with right now because your challenges that you're facing aren't really system problems. They're actually people problems that you have. There's some culture problems and there's some process issues that you have. I still remember the CEO kind of looking at me and saying, are you turning down my money? And I said, yes, I am. And he was like, why? And I said, look, man, I went into my first startup for all the wrong reasons. I failed miserably both in work and in life there. It taught me something, which is I don't want to do anything that doesn't fit within being honest and acting with integrity. And I do not want to convince anybody of anything that's not meaningful. And by the time I got to Polyform Labs, I think I had a completely different value system because of the failures that we went through in the first startup. And then I kind of made this pitch to him and I said that, look, but at the same time, why don't you spend a significantly smaller amount of money, hire us for about a month. We can consult for you and help look at these process issues, look at some of these other things, and we can help you solve those things for you. And you don't need to replace your ERP. And he said, sure, that sounds like a great plan. Right. And we started working with this client for the next month. And we were able to address all of those original challenges. But
Mm-hmm.
something quite interesting came up. We actually saw these opportunities for in improving some of their processes. They had this process being a real estate company where they had to what's called abstract leases, right? So they 80, 90 page documents that are leases that an accountant would have to sit down and spend 3 to 4 hours reading this document and then abstracting legal clauses into their accounting system. So let's say a lease is coming up or a tenant has come back and said, hey, we need to break our lease early. They're going into this accounting system to look at these abstracts to see, is there a penalty if they break the lease early? What they
Got it.
found is they would be going to the accounting system to look at this information. Oftentimes the information would be wrong because it was just manually entered incorrectly. And the accountant would have to end up going back to the lease and sifting through the document all over again anyway, right? We said that, hey, you know what? We could possibly build a machine learning tool that can take these legal documents and using two things. One was OCR technology, so we could read these old documents and digitize them? And two, can we build a machine learning tool that can abstract these documents for you? And so we got about 1,000 leases, fed them into our system, into our algorithm, trained it to become fairly accurate at abstracting. The accountant could do is they compare them, and if it's correct, they sort of hit a checkbox. It goes into the learning system. If it was incorrect, they correct the abstract, and then they hit input this new data that goes into the learning system. Eventually, it got to the point where the system achieved. It started off at about, I think it was around 86% accuracy after all the training, and then by the end, we got it to about 97% accuracy. Now, when we built these things for the client, we saw an opportunity because we said, I'm pretty sure this is not just a problem for this client. So we spoke to that client and we said, would you guys be interested in an interesting model with us? Which is, would you like to do a joint venture with us where you pay the cost of us building these solutions, but let's co-own the IP for this, and then let's go on to resell this to your competitors. We do the work where it gets solved for you at cost anyways. And three, there's an opportunity for you guys to make more money off of this. Right. And I remember the CEO was like, okay, this is kind of a no-brainer deal. Of course, we'll do this for you guys. Right. Because he was a pretty progressive, pretty forward-thinking guy. And we were able to go and resell this in that particular domain. And interesting exit for that particular suite of products as well is because we built all of this tooling on top of that ERP system, eventually the ERP company came and acquired our technology. Right. And so we got an exit from that. Our first client who co-owned the IP with us, they got an exit from that as well.
I'm curious now, how did this all kind of end up with you taking on the role at Almosafer? Maybe a quick intro on how did you land at Almosafer? What inspired you to take on the role? And then what were those first few months like? What were some of the biggest challenges? And how did you sort of go on towards tackling those challenges?
So after those first couple of startup experiences, I was pretty burned out. And around that time, my wife and I had our son, like he was born. And I made this conscious decision that, you know what, I actually just want to take a year off to be a dad. And in that year, my wife and I made the decision to relocate to Dubai, primarily so that our son gets to grow up with his cousins, because we had some family here in Dubai. And so we moved here, and I moved here with zero plan. I didn't want to do another startup. I was very much like, hey, I just want to get a job. And I spent 7.5 months looking for work while I was here, and I just couldn't find anything, right? Like I was like, wait, I thought I was a fairly, I thought I had a pretty good CV. I'd done some useful stuff, and I just literally could not get an interview. Like I think I got 2 interviews, and both of them ended up rejecting me. In parallel to that time when I was trying to look for a job, I had my mentor back home, he gave me some great advice. He said, Ronnie, don't go there and just be useless. Go to Dubai. It's a new place for you. Go get involved in the startup community there, right? So around that time, I got involved in a lot of these startup incubators here. So doing both mentorship work, helping judge panels for startup competitions. And eventually, that's what led me to getting introduced to the then CEO of Almosafer, which at that time, by the way, was called Tajawul. So it was a Dubai-based brand called Tajawul. I got introduced to the CEO. We ended up having this amazing, 3-hour long chat where it was just about life and it was just about our values. And he looked at me and he's like, well, this guy, I don't know if this guy knows product all that great, but I think he's a good character. He seems really honest, and he seems like he can learn. And he brought me in as a product manager for their flights product. And I kind of made this deal with them. I said, look, I don't know travel because that's not an area that I come from. I've never scaled a product of this size. I've always taken a product sort of from 0 to 1, 0 to 10, and then I've exited. You're looking to really build something big, and I've never built anything big like that before. Like neither in size of customers, not in size of team, not in size of technology. So can we agree on something, which is let's test me out for 3 months. In those 3 months, if I can do something meaningful with this flights team, and I can learn the product, I can learn the industry, and I can learn how to work with you guys and do something useful. If in 3 months I'm capable of doing that, great, then let's keep me going. If not, I'll be the first one to say, look, man, I'm not the right person for the job, and you can also fire me, no harm, no foul, right? Like we can leave, we can part on good terms. So this is kind of how we started. I owe that guy a lot for, his name is Mohammed Shabib, and he really took a chance on me, and I really appreciate him for it. And it was a very founder-driven organization where the concept was, guys, let's go copy Booking.com. Let's go copy some other airline websites. let's localize it in Arabic because we are in the local market. And really, the idea behind it was we have funding. Let us spend money to discount and acquire customers. This was the starting strategy, right? Again, not some really, really brilliant. I'd love to sit here and tell you that there was some really brilliant strategy, but no, there wasn't. That it
Yeah.
really was, hey, let's buy our customers and let's see where we can evolve the product once we acquire them. And it worked. It worked for the first year and a half or so. And I joined them after year one. So I joined them just after that growth period. And it
Mm-hmm.
was at that point when the CEO brought me on. He told me, he's like, Ryan, part of the reason why we need someone to come in with a different kind of thinking, a fresh kind of thinking, is we have run out of ideas. Everything that we're kind of launching at this point, we're doing a lot of work. Everyone's working really hard, but we don't see the impact in our business right now, right?
Got it.
But I guess to give some idea of like the lead up to that point was we were a few resources I'll point people to. Like I told you, I didn't really know how to do product at scale, but I'm a really good student. So the first thing I did was I'm pretty sure other people have done phenomenal work in the space before. So I went out and looked at who are the people that are the preeminent, let's say, educators,
Mm-hmm.
thought leaders. And the name that kept popping up for me was Marty Kagan, who wrote the book Inspired. And I picked up his book and I read it. And I decided that this is going to be my sort of textbook, right? Of course, there's a ton of other books I read around that time too, but that was the most influential, impactful one for me because it is the one that taught me the mindset and also the concepts behind solving problems for a customer that are meaningful for a customer in a way that actually generates value for your business. That was the simple sort of foundational principle that Marty was communicating at that time. And his book taught me the framework for it and the methodology for it. So I started bringing those ideas into our product team. And I also give a lot of credit to my CTO. His name is Kais Amuri, brilliant, brilliant guy. And he sort of came on after I was there for about a year or so. He came on board, and he, for me, was the game changer. Like when he came on board, I think we had this, the product thinking that I was trying to bring to the
Mm-hmm.
organization, but he brought in a tech, a really, really amazing tech mindset. And we just hit it off as two human beings. We grew the team together. And at that time, what we were really looking at is we thought of it as simply this: how do we create an environment where people love growing, learning, and solving problems? Like it became a very cultural thing for us. It wasn't about just building the product. It was about we want people to really grow and learn. We were what's called a feature factory, which is, founders give you a request or a requirement, team goes and implements it. Now, what's interesting is we were delivering, initially our delivery engine was not very good. And that's why when Heist came on board, he really helped solve that. He was such an amazing architect and
Mm-hmm.
delivery head that he was amazing at committing to things and delivering on those commitments. In parallel to him getting our delivery engine just working so phenomenally well, I started asking some questions around, okay, so we're delivering these things, but what impact is it making? And at that point, we weren't measuring anything. We had zero instrumentation. So we'd be deploying things and we would basically look at our revenue numbers to see, well, did it have any impact? Like, can you
Mm-hmm.
imagine like how far downstream that measurement of value is? It's like we've come up with an idea, we've spent all of this time and effort building something, we've deployed it into production, and now customers are using it. And now we're looking at sales numbers to measure whether what we deployed is creating value or not. This is where a lot of learning was, no, we got to go way earlier upstream, right? And we slowly started moving backwards, where the first thing that we started doing was we just started instrumenting all of our products. Can we track
Mm-hmm.
everything? Can we measure everything? And we started doing this practice where even if we were just delivering something that was based on a feature request, we started A/B testing everything. We started deploying it. Here's the old and here's the new. Can we compare what is the performance of the new compared to the old? And suddenly we were able to see, were we driving any real impact? Were we
Mm-hmm.
solving meaningful problems for our customer? Right. Um,
Yep.
and initially, I'll tell you, all of our measurements were failing. Right. And by failing, I mean they
Mm-hmm.
just weren't showing any positive numbers. Yet the guesses are not based on any form of critical thinking. And so in parallel, we started incorporating both qualitative and quantitative critical thinking, which is, and I also around that time was lucky enough to bring on board our head of user experience. His name is Marco Pretorius. He was another exceptionally lucky find for me. Just a phenomenal user researcher. And like he came in, he saw my vision for us being a customer centric, customer focused organization. And he bought in and he helped me deliver that. As soon as he came on board, he's like, all right, Ronnie, this is how we're going to go out and start doing research with customers. And he started putting a lot of that work into place of research with customers. And we were able to bring all those customer stories back to the stakeholders, to the C-level leaders at the time. And suddenly it was amazing to see the engagement from the C-level leaders,
Mm-hmm.
from other departments and stakeholders. And it was phenomenal because as soon as you put a customer story in front of people, everyone's eyes just light up of like, this is a real person with a real problem. Let's go solve this. An example of that was one of our first research cycle that we ran was for a hotel product. And we did basic usability testing, right? Is we went to a bunch of customers and we
Mm-hmm.
got them to do a full run through of our existing product. The
Okay.
number one resounding sort of feedback that came back from customers we did testing with was, well, when we get to your hotel images page and when we get to your room images page, we don't see any images. And so I exit your page because
Mm,
I don't see the room I'm going to be staying in. And in fact, we saw this
got it.
very interesting behavior. They would go to a competitor's website and they would
Mm-hmm.
look at the images of the same hotel room in a competitor's website. And then they would come back to our site and sometimes they would complete the purchase because we had better prices. And now, of course, a lot of times I think that's what they told us just to be nice, I think. I don't think they necessarily did that. In some cases, I think some customers did because they were genuinely getting better prices for especially local hotels, right? Because our commercial team was just negotiating better prices. And so we were able to give better prices to our customers. But this was eye opening for us. And so this problem of really good user content, right? Like purchase content or visual content for our customers, as soon as we showed it to all the other teams, marketing,
Mm-hmm.
customer care, our C-level team, also with our data team as well.
Okay.
Everybody came on board and said, this is the number one problem we have to solve. Drop everything else. And by the way, solving this problem was not as simple because the content is not our content. We're getting most of our sellable packages from third parties, and we have to go and source all this content from third parties as well. And then we have to somehow come up with a way to map this content to the packages that we're getting from our suppliers. That was a complex problem to solve, right? And so we spent and invested a significant amount of time and effort to solve this. And we ended up becoming the first player in the region, like a regional player, to solve this content problem effectively. And suddenly we saw unbelievable increase in our conversion rate, and so that came from one, data research, because we could see where the dropout was happening for our users, and two, then the contextual customer research, where when we started doing the usability testing with our customers, they were able to point out for us that, well, the reason why I exit this page is because I don't see the content I need. But we wouldn't have known that because unless we got the context. So the data analytics tells you what's happening. It was the user research that told us why it's happening.
I'm actually curious to understand prioritization of problems, like which problems do you solve, which features do you prioritize? How do you go about picking which ones to solve? Obviously, there's different ways of how you can do it, right? Impact the customer and so on. But talk to me a little bit about how did you guys go about prioritizing these problems? Just a few more insights on that.
I think the way that I describe it, they fall into maybe two broad categories of problems that we're constantly trying to solve, right? One, the category of problems is optimization problems, right? So optimization problems are what I call, you have an existing product, an existing journey, and you're trying to keep optimizing it to improve that journey, right? So that's one category of problems. The second category I would say is more greenfield, right? Which is, okay, you're trying to launch a new product, you're trying to launch a fundamentally new feature that, your customers are not using. How do you pick those products or features to build where you've got no existing data or research you can go to? So let me start with the first one, which is the optimization problem. That one was based on an ongoing process of continuous discovery within our organization, right? Like I told you, like we were in a process of constant usability testing with our product, constant data analytics, constant experimentation. And all of that is driving to, we would use something called a user story map, right? Where we were constantly using this user story map to understand what the journey of the customer is within our product. And the data is constantly telling you where the challenge points are, right? And then we were also segmenting those journeys by different types of customers or different channels where customers were coming in from. So again, you get like a different slice of a view of where are the problem points in the journey, right? And of course, like you have to think about it from the perspective of your standard funnel, where you have to think about it as being there's acquisition, there's activation, there's engagement or adoption, then there is your revenue generation, which is they convert. Then there is some form of expansion and then possibly referral that comes after that. So there's that broad funnel that you're looking at. And you're also then looking at the smaller funnels, which is in each of those parts of the journey. First, you look at the big numbers and you say, okay, is it an acquisition problem that we're facing? Is it an activation problem? Is it an engagement problem? Okay, let's go figure out where we should focus our effort. Then you go deeper, one level deeper into that journey, and then you can figure out more of the problems. And this is using both customer research and data analytics and experimentation, right? And
Got
the
it.
data would really guide us. The customer research would really guide us, right? Like, because if you've got out of 15 customer interviews, if you're seeing, 10 customers talking about the same problem, that's a good sign that, hey, this is a common enough problem, right? That everyone's facing. And we can see the data correlate with that as well. Now, if I talk about the second category, which is the greenfield, new product, brand feature that no one's ever used, this one is a lot more difficult, right? Because if the first one, you have a lot of research and data that you can trust. The second one is you really, I think, trusting your own intuition, you do have to make some pretty strong informed bets, right? So I'll give an example of this. So our business was in travel and COVID really impacted us. Our business shut down in a matter of a couple of weeks, right? Like we went from 2019 being where we hit $1 billion in revenue, right? Exponential growth, to 2020, everything shut down, right? You can imagine, like, holy crap, like, what's going on here? How do we respond? How do we adapt? The good news was, because we were already doing a lot of customer research and customer engagement around that time, we were hearing from our customers that they, even though they weren't booking flights and hotels, in Saudi Arabia specifically, there was a segment of customers that was booking these things called chalets. And so they're basically like these private properties where people don't even go there to stay overnight. It's like a family or a group of friends will get a property that has a big field or a football field, or, these multiple family groups where people get together, they do a barbecue, they can play football, and people come together as a community. And people were booking these things. And at that time, everything was done offline on WhatsApp, right? So they would find the owner of the property, they would be talking to them on WhatsApp. The customer would have to physically go to the property and do a walkthrough to figure out whether this was a property they wanted to rent or not. So all of our customers at that time were telling us, it's like, hey, we're not traveling right now, but we're just booking these trajas. And then we did some research around that to understand whether there was any digital solution for the space. And we found out that there really wasn't. So us as a business at that time decided, guys, let's take a bet, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is our customer base. They seem to be using this other experience. The other experience is definitely, within our domain. It's not quite travel, but it is experiential. We've got all the baseline foundation technology for it. Can we spin something up fairly quickly to create a marketplace and a new technology for this? And so we took a bet to do it. We saw a business grow very quickly because we had an existing brand, but we also were able to go and build these great relationships with suppliers and create a commercial offering to our customers at that time. Going back to some of my other startups, to your question around how do you prioritize, when you're building new products, a lot of the prioritization has to be based on talking to customers, understanding what their problems are, and then going on your instinct of prioritization. On the one hand, with optimization, I'm a huge believer in use data. Data should guide you. But I say something very specific. I don't believe in being data driven. I believe in being data informed,
Got it.
which is, in either case, whether it's optimization or greenfield, if you're waiting for 100% validation from data, you are already too late.
Correct.
You have to make decisions based on whatever data that you have available to you. In one case, you just have a lot more rich data available to you. So you should be able to make more data informed decisions that increase the probability of the bets that you're taking. But ultimately, the only way you'll know is by testing it and seeing how it performs. But on the other side, when you're doing something brand new, you gotta make some instinctual bets. The whole idea is that you got to get something out there as quickly as you can, because only the physical act of getting something out there in front of a customer will actually start creating feedback loops for you. And then you can use what exists in the optimization model, where you have something you can actually test or do research on with customers, which will inform your prioritization decisions. A very useful tool that I will tell your listeners is there's a great book I always recommend. It's called Continuous Discovery Habits. I have it here.
Okay.
That's why I'm looking for it. It was
Okay.
written by someone named Teresa Torres, and she introduced me to a model called opportunity solution trees, which is a mental model that allows you to take a problem objective that you're trying to solve, a metric
Uh-huh.
that you're trying to move, and then under that tree, you create a tree that is all of the different potential problems or opportunities that exist that will achieve that outcome that you're driving towards.
Interesting.
And it's a visual model that allows you to work with your team and with your
Mm-hmm.
stakeholders, that allows you to, one, visualize all the different potential problems, allows you to bring in any data knowledge that you might have or any research knowledge that you might have, any assumptions that you're making. So you can compare and contrast these opportunities against
Mm-hmm.
each other, and then you guys can collectively come to a sensible prioritization decision. So
Nice.
this was the tool, and it's not a science, by the way, right? It's as
Mm-hmm.
much, I think, an art, collaboration, making informed instinctual decisions as it was. It's just the visual tool allowed a group of people to do it together.
So I think I'm gonna kind of take a bit of a detour here. I'm curious to we'll keep the talk about travel because I'm interested to see what's your perspectives on this. How do you think travel, the entire OTA space, is gonna change with the rise of tools like ChatGPT, AI? Obviously, I feel like there's gonna be a bit of a revolution coming in terms of how people are gonna book. What's like your prediction, or what do you think might end up happening, say five years down the line?
That's a great question, and I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I'm not going to make a prediction. Actually, I'll be honest with you. Like I've never been one for predictions of this nature, because part of what's quite interesting with the kind of technology that exists is, or
Mm-hmm.
especially when we see the new exponential technologies like generative AI and stuff coming out, is
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of things that are possible, right? Like a lot of things that are possible, and solving, like using these technologies that are available or newly available to us, to me, still goes back to solving fundamental problems. I don't know who said it. I can't remember if it was Jeff Bezos with, um, I think he was the one who said that don't chase after the next new shiny thing. Solve something that is going to be relatively timeless,
Got it.
because then you know that you will be future proof in whatever you do. Right. And I would say in the travel space, the way that I'll answer your question is not about what do I think these technologies will solve. I'll tell you what problems have not been solved yet still,
Okay.
that I believe that these technologies will bring us closer to being able to solve. The kind of technologies that are underlying to travel are
Mm-hmm.
also quite old, right?
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is, for example, hotel supplier technologies,
Mm-hmm.
air supplier technologies. These are some really, really old technologies. And there's, like, in the hotel space alone, if you looked at the ecosystem of technology and also suppliers, it's so convoluted, right? To give you an example, there's, like, you have a hotel that will load up their content onto one distributor,
Mm-hmm.
and they will create a contract with that one distributor with a certain price with them. That distributor will distribute that content through all the other distributors. So this hotel will load to this distributor, this one too, but that distributor is also distributing to all the other distributors. So for me as an OTA, when I receive a package from a supplier, the challenge I face is I don't know who the actual original supplier is, because I'm just getting it from whoever the intermediary is. And so I don't really know if this is the best price. I don't know what the margin is. And sometimes the content, the selling content changes through
Mhm.
each one of these pipes that it goes through. And what happens is at the end, when you sell it to a customer, there's a good chance that what you're selling isn't even the original product. So I think what these new technologies enable is being able to solve these very complex problems more efficiently and more scalably. But I think with the kind of AI and machine learning that we're seeing today, these types of mapping problems are going to be solved much more efficiently and scalably and accurately as well.
So don't you see a future where you'll probably be talking to ChatGPT and you'd say, "Hey ChatGPT, I need you to book a flight to Riyadh next week, business class, go ahead, book it." Do you see that happening anytime soon, or is
Yeah,
that
absolutely. I mean, I see that kind of stuff already happening. But what's interesting is that maybe it's because I come from the travel space.
Mhm.
I think that's cool, but I don't think that's game changing. If I don't know, I don't know how to describe it. Like it's kind of like I can do that with a travel agent today, you know?
correct?
So
Yep.
yes, it's cool that I'm talking to a machine to do it, but the machine's doing fundamentally nothing different than what a person used to do for me today. So from a customer's perspective, if anything, actually, I liked talking to a person because it's a person that I'm
Yep.
talking to.
True.
And that person can also make me more personalized recommendations. I think the value that exists here in the machine is the machine also just has access to all of that data much quicker and can probably turn things around to you faster. I'll tell you another big thing that's a more of a personal thing. I'm just getting more and more scared of how much machines know about me now. I mean, okay, so talking to ChatGPT, you're getting to know way too much about me.
Have you tried that question of prompting ChatGPT and asking, "What do you know about me that I don't know about myself?"
Not yet.
Try that, and you'll see how much it knows about you.
Okay. Well,
It's a very interesting
interesting.
thing.
I was just having this conversation with a friend the other day where, I think once you turn the memory function on ChatGPT, then you can actually ask it that question and it remembers the
Okay.
context of all of your conversations and will
Okay.
then give you a fascinating answer. There's something similar that you should, if you know of Notebook LLM, so Google's, so you should try. So I think it's there. They have this it's like a podcast feature or something like that. The
Mhm.
one where you can feed it sort of content, and then you
Uh-huh.
can ask it to create literally a podcast between two people based on whatever sources of information you've given it.
Oh, wow.
Try
Okay.
this out. Give it your CV, give it
Okay.
your LinkedIn profile, and give it any other public information that there might be available about you. If you have a
Hmm.
website or whatever it is, feed it to Notebook LLM, and then ask it to create a podcast about you. So
Okay.
on the one hand, you're saying that, hey, ask ChatGPT what does it know about you that you might not know about yourself. Now try listening to a podcast that
Hmm.
sounds like it's two people talking about you. It's mind bending. It's literally mind bending. I got goosebumps. I was like, this is freaking me out.
I'll probably try that. Yeah. Super. So I think one last question before we wrap up. There's this interesting point that you mentioned that digital transformation is more about people than technology. I want you to elaborate a bit on that, and I want you to kind of summarize product leaders, product teams, whether it's zero to one journeys or scaling larger startups. What's the underlying message around digital transformation, and what sort of advice in general would you give to product leaders?
Great question. I'm going to have to answer this question from a very, very personal perspective of why
Hmm.
I went into doing what I did.
Hmm.
So when I say that digital transformation is not really about technology, it's actually about people. It's because when I went into Almosafer and really even my previous startup before that, it was never about the technology. It was about the group of people, right? Like I had this, in fact, at Almosafer for the first, I would say 2 years or so, I will admit that I didn't even have a product strategy, right? Like because we were just
Hmm.
sort of like deploying things and testing them out. We were seeing, and we were very by the seat of our pants and everything that we were doing. I'd like to, again, come back and say we were very profound. No, we were just like puttering our way through and figuring things out.
Hmm.
And but so I didn't have a product strategy, but what I did have is I had a very clear culture strategy. right? And what I mean by that is I went in there and there was a small group of people that were made up of product managers, designers, engineers. And I knew myself and I knew that I loved learning. I loved experimenting and I loved this concept of growing and learning and trying out new things in order to create some sort of an impact as a byproduct of that growing and learning. I also saw an environment when I first walked in there that was very robotic. It was very like, okay, what do we build and what do we launch? There was very little feedback loop or learning and growth that was happening. So I wanted to create an environment where people were both learning about customers and applying all these new methods and practices, but they
Mm-hmm.
were also growing and developing as people, right? And I knew that one of the key factors that were required for that to happen was creating a safe environment. It had to be a psychologically safe environment where people felt like they could try things out and make mistakes, and then nobody was going to come and like slap them on the hand for making a mistake. Instead, we rephrased it to what did we learn, right? What did you learn from that, right? And this is a space where we got to grow and learn. But because we created this environment where people could just feel safe, sharing their ideas, sharing their questions, challenging each other, there was nothing that was considered to be stupid. And again, I think the other part too is one was around this culture of learning. The second one was around a culture of ownership. Is everybody has to feel like they own the outcome of what they do. And there's no just owning I used to often in the early days hear people say this thing where it's like, hey, how come we didn't deliver by the date that we expected to deliver? And there would be this common response I would get back from someone saying that, well, I did my part. And I'd be like, what do you mean by that? What do you mean you did your part? So the engineer would be like, well, I engineered it. Now it's with QA. And QA would be like, well, I tested it. So I finished my
Mm-hmm.
part. And I'd be like, guys, there is no concept of I did my part. We are a collective. We either collectively succeed or we collectively fail. You have to understand what your team is doing and you got to stand up for each other and back each other up. And the third thing that we did was it is okay to put your hand up and say that you screwed up. That was cool. That was totally cool. And I would be the first one to do it. Like when I would make a mistake, I would be the first one to tell my team, guys, I actually don't understand this. I don't know this. I have to go and figure it out. Or I tried this and it failed. And I look back at my team and I'm so blessed to have had the team that I had with me because they were willing to put up with my crazy ideas and try a whole bunch of stuff that I would honestly tell you 80% of my ideas failed. But I think that what they saw was they saw this deep inner want for all of them to be really happy and fulfilled in what they did. I wanted them to be happy whether they stayed with the company or not. And I used to have this one thing I used to tell my team all the time, guys, I care about you as people first and foremost before I care about this company. I don't care if the company succeeds, but I care if you succeed. It doesn't mean that everything's easy, right? That you're facing challenges together and we're overcoming them and we're growing in the process and you're being recognized and rewarded for it. If that happens for you, the natural byproduct is, of course, you're going to want to do an amazing job for your customer and for the business that you work for, even when things were tough, even when COVID happened. It's like, one of the most amazing things about that time during COVID was, again, I give so much credit to my CEO and my leadership team, all the people at that time. All of the leaders decided to take a 30% pay cut and not lay the team off because we
Mm-hmm.
said we're going to collectively suffer or we're going to collectively win. And we'd rather keep this amazing team and let's figure some things out and stretch this for as long as we could when a lot of other companies were reacting with, hey, let's just lay off a lot of people to create a culture where, and I've been lucky enough to, since I transitioned from being a product leader into being a leadership coach within the technology space in the past year. So I left Almosafer in April of this year and I started my own coaching practice. What was amazing about that was when I went in to tell my CEO, and I was like, oh my God, like I got to tell this guy after 7 years, I want to
Yeah.
go and do this. I could see, the sadness in his face. And he said, okay, Ronnie, this is hitting me. Give me a day. I need to think about this before I respond to anything. And he knows me. He knows my character. He knows my belief system. And he knows that once I've made a decision, I've made it based on a real deep study of my choices. And he knew that he was going to change my mind because he knew that I had made a decision for reasons really important to me. But he came the next day and he said, Ronnie, I know I can't change your mind and I'm not going to try. because I know you. I've worked with
Mm.
you for 7 years. I know who you are. But I will ask one simple thing, which is if you're going to go and become a leadership coach, would you consider taking us on as your first client? Right? Which is, okay, go do what you want to do. And I fully support that. But can you keep coaching our leaders because that's just who you are? And he made that transition and they made that transition so seamless for me where I left my role as a product leader, but I got to stay as part of that culture.
Great. I think before we wrap up, just a quick intro on mindful leadership. I mean, what is it all about? And I'm just curious how maybe product leaders, if they're interested, they could work with you. What was the inspiration behind starting mindful leadership?
So what inspired me to start mindful leadership, my coaching and consulting business is, so we talked a lot about how to build product, how to grow a
Mm-hmm.
product. There's a certain kind of mechanic to it, or let's say a
Mm-hmm.
science or a math behind it. But the challenge that most leaders face is that leaders are quite good at their competency space, right? Like you don't become a product leader unless you're great at product. You don't become a marketing leader unless you're great at marketing. But what most people don't realize is when they switch into that leadership role, which is you're now leading a team of people, or you're leading a division, or sometimes you're leading a full on company, your job is completely different from the domain expertise that you were in. So if you're a strong product manager and then suddenly you're a product director or a VP of product and now you're running this big product organization, a lot of your job has nothing to do with the product. It has to do with the people. And it has to do with setting a vision for them. It has to do with inspiring them. It has to do with coaching them and growing them. It has to do with creating that culture that I was describing to you where they thrive and they succeed. It has to do with dealing with finicky stakeholders and with executives and stakeholders that might be wanting something tomorrow, but how do you manage that? How do you manage that kind of conflict? All of that part of my learning did not come from the job, did not come from any of the books that I read. It actually came from, I sort of got introduced or sort of went down a spiritual path about 12 years ago, through meditation, through prayer, through journaling, through various different forms that I realized how I went into my first startup for all the wrong reasons because I was deeply selfish and self centered and it was all about me. When I sort of went through this bottoming out experience at that time, I switched my ethos to because I had amazing mentors who said, Ronnie, it's not about you. It's actually about everything and everyone else. Make your contribution, make a positive impact to them, and put yourself aside. And they taught me a lot of mechanisms and practices that were centering practices and mindfulness practices and a belief system that was all around being of service to the world around you that I've incorporated into every startup, into every team, and then lastly into Almosafer when we scaled it. And I truly believe that it's that belief system and that value system that
Mm-hmm.
permeated into all of the domain competency of product that made the product work that we did succeed. And there's a great framework that I will share with you, which is what I do my coaching based on. It's called the Trust Framework by Stephen M. R. Covey. And it talks about trust is the greatest value or currency that you have as an individual. And, to be a trusted person, to be a trusted human being, to be a trusted leader. And trust can actually be tangibly broken down into two other things, which is your character and your competence. And your
Mm-hmm.
character can be further broken down into two things, which is your integrity and your intent. Your integrity is your value system, right? And are you living congruently with that value system? Your
Okay.
intent is, are you just serving yourself? Are you trying to help other people? Or are you
Mm.
trying to create win-win situations for other people, right? That
Right.
defines your character. And the competency side is made up of two different things as well, which is your capabilities, which is a lot of the product stuff we've been talking about. That's your capability, right? Is that, am I analytical? Can I learn? Do I have domain knowledge? Do I have a particular skill set? And do I have this capability to learn really, really quickly? And then the second thing under competence is the results you've delivered. Like what
Mm.
impact, measurable impact have you driven? A lot of leadership coaching focuses very much on the competency side. And if I was to share my story, a lot of people focus on the competency side of the work. Like I even got like our work got published in a couple of product books as case studies of transformation success. But I'll tell you, like one of them is a book called Transform by Marty Kagan. and the other one is that book called Continuous Discovery Habits by Teresa Torres. And both of them share our, one is about how we did discovery, and the other one is about our transformation. And they
Mm-hmm.
share these as case studies of our success. But the case study as it's shared in those books only share part of the story, which is the competence part of the story. There was a huge part on the character side of the story, the culture side of the story, that was around, you know, what was the value system that we operated by? How did we live by that value system, caring about other people, creating success for other people, creating an honest, integrity based place for people to live and operate, making it a fulfilling place for people to work. Like
Mm.
all these things that were very human traits, getting people to think win win, which is your success is actually based on everybody else's success, and shifting that mindset. And so the kind of coaching that I do today is obviously the competency based product leadership coaching that I do, but it's also bringing this other piece around character development that, I really want people to understand that it's both of them working together. And it's what I love to do, because I got to live it and now I get to help other leaders. It just inspires me to want to support them to do the same thing.
Ronnie, thank you so much for this. I think it's been really insightful and I've learned so much. I'm super excited to edit this and put it out to the world. But yeah, thank you so much for joining the show and yeah, we'll be in touch.
My pleasure, Tassif. Thank you so much for having me on.